Hello, everyone. Welcome to Inclusive Collective, where we share stories and learnings of inclusive people, organizations, and innovation. I'm your co host, Rob Hadley, a people and culture strategist specializing in DEI and people analytics. And I'm known around here as the sidekick to one Nadia Butt, an organizational development and belonging strategist. Nadia, great to see you. Thanks for having me along. What's going on?
Well, hi, Rob. Sidekick, huh?
Yeah, I'm the Ed McMahon to your Johnny Carson. Little
Do you
dated,
know
little
do
dated
you know
reference.
every time somebody uses the word sidekick, do you know what immediately comes to my brain?
The Suzuki sidekick, the car? No.
Yes, the cart that's like right? So, like, I'm driving either, like, what, a motorcycle or a car, and then, like, you're in the little side
Oh,
you're, like, in
oh.
the little side cart next to
Okay,
it. Maybe somebody
that's
can draw that for us.
that's the image you have? The
That's the
next
image.
logo that's exactly what it will be. Just mark that down.
Oh.
Nadia, I had a question for you. I was just wondering, starting to get a little bit of a nip here, a little chilly.
Mhm.
So when does fall start for you? When is the how do you mark fall?
Well, I think how I mark fall is different from how other people mark fall because in my hand, as we are speaking, is a Dunkin' Donuts pumpkin
Mhm.
spice
Yep.
latte.
Yep.
I think people mark fall by when pumpkin spice lattes are available in either Starbucks or Dunkin' Donuts. I mark it
So
by
like early
probably
August.
early.
Like
Are
that's yeah.
actually some of these places are
In
like
Boston,
year
probably early
round now.
August. Yeah.
Yeah. I mark it when the temperature starts to drop. So,
Okay. Yeah. Yeah.
like, you can just feel, like, this crispness in the air, if that makes sense. So, it's starting to get a little bit cooler. You can definitely start to see, like, the leaves will start to change. So that's when I start to say that's fall. I started saying it was fall, like, September 1st.
Okay. Okay. Yeah. September. Yeah. Some people say September. Some people wait till the end. I
Yeah.
just saw. I had that question because I saw some Halloween decorations on a neighbor's lawn, and I was thinking, wow, they're
Oh,
ready to go. They're a little
yeah,
bit
there
early
that's
for me.
aggressive. Well,
Yeah.
somebody was saying that they went to Costco. I was doing a workshop, and somebody in the workshop said there's already Christmas decor out.
Yeah.
And I was like, "Yeah, that's about right."
Yeah. Yeah. Fast forward everything.
Yeah.
Right. Just go. Things should move faster in life. Right.
Yeah, of course. Well, Rob, I'm excited for this week because this week on Inclusive Collective, we'll be talking to Dr. Peter Huang, a retired professor and author of the book Disrupting Racism. Things of, our favorite topics here. We'll also discuss former Rolling Stone editor and Rock and Roll Hall of Fame founder Jann Wenner's comments about women and BIPOC musicians and talk about Black America's favorite college football team, the Colorado Buffaloes. And later, we'll be ranting and raving about the city of Boston and my favorite, sports.
Awesome. Sounds great. But first, Nadia,
Yeah.
you know what time it is. Can I get 2 minutes? All right. So this is something that's I've heard a couple of times recently. I'm at a
Mm.
company or someone who runs a company or leader at a company saying that, hey, we're somewhat new to DEI. I hear from my peers that at their companies, they have something called a DEI committee. All
Yeah.
right. So
Uh-huh.
tell me, Nadia, give me 2 minutes on what does a committee make? When does that make sense? What does a committee do? When does it make sense? What do they need in order to be successful?
Yeah. What I will say it really all depends on the organization, right?
Sure.
So part of embedding diversity, equity, inclusion into the company culture should really include involving employees. And that means involving folks from different levels, departments, demographics. Really in what they're doing is helping and designing and participating in the different structures and initiatives and goals, right? I think this recognizes the importance of participation
Hmm.
and the voice of the employee in creating a successful inclusive culture, right? So then the next question is like, well, what do they do? So the DEI committee, if organizations decide to move forward with them and develop and form one, then they really typically are there to organize and maintain the DEI initiatives in the company.
Okay.
So they form around common goals that were identified. They may include smaller subcommittees that are focused on various parts of DEI work to really push things forward, really focused work, of course, on specific topics. And then I think the overall, overall, the committees can really help to bridge the gap between the current state and the future state, moving forward goals. I think also though what it's the DEI committees are created to really help organizations stay accountable to what they put in place as goals. So it's less lip service, right?
Hmm.
And
Hmm.
really taking more steps to sustainable employee directed change. Where DEI committees can fall short are a few
Hmm.
things. So the first is like the lack of leadership commitment and accountability or sponsorship. The second could be like requiring participation, especially from people with marginalized identities, because that can further perpetuate burnout or exclusion or tokenism.
Hmm.
Um, and then the third is the limited scope on diversity. DEI committees really should challenge their thinking and expand their perspectives of what the definition of diversity, equity, and inclusion mean to the organization. So
Hmm.
that might be, expanding our thoughts on like including people like the elderly, socioeconomic background, disadvantages or people that come from that background, pregnant people, neurodivergent people, people where English is a second language, or even folks from certain different religious backgrounds. And then finally, I think that DEI committees should it should not be a check the box activity
Hmm.
or mentality, really understanding that the role of the committee is critical when it's formed. And so aligning on its purpose and its why. It's a
Hmm.
great opportunity for the organization to have employees. I almost like to call it like a think tank. Like
Hmm.
it's a big brainstorming session to really pull ideas from the employees to really put them into action mode.
Hmm.
But yeah, I think the key here is that it's a mechanism to support accountability.
Thank you for that, Nadia. Appreciate those 2 minutes. And let's get to the deets. What do you got for us?
Well, so Jann Wenner, the co-founder of Rolling Stone magazine, recently said that Black and women musicians didn't quote unquote articulate rock music philosophy well enough to be included in his new book that was released.
Hmm.
Wenner was asked by the New York Times why his new book of classic interviews with musicians called Only Included White Men. And he said, quote, insofar as women, I mean, they were just, none of them were as articulate enough on this intellectual level. The interviewer from the New York Times pushed back on Wenner, and he further then stated of Black artists, they just didn't articulate at that level.
Mm, okay.
Interesting. um, and I'll just say that here that of course the backlash was resounding, right? Like criticisms of Wenner, I think for many folks goes further than just his book. Historically, there are critics saying that the Rolling Stone magazine and other kind of they're calling it like gatekeeper culture,
Hmm.
where people have historically excluded or minimized the achievements of women and people of color, really kind of highlighting the longstanding racial inequities in the music business. Your thoughts?
Yeah. Well, one, I like the way that you read the quote from Mr. Wenner with
Yeah.
disdain.
Yeah,
Like,
did I?
you,
I was
your
like, "Quote,
your
articulate."
dramatic reading like sounded like how you felt about the quote. So there's that.
Yeah,
I had the
love
exact same thought about gatekeeping, right? So I thought about how so much of our tastes are made by people like Mr. Wenner, right? So
yeah.
Taylor Swift wouldn't be Taylor Swift unless someone like Mr. Wenner tells you that you need to pay attention, right? And so that was
Mm,
even more the case over his 40-year reign at Rolling Stone, right? So that was a very big deal, right?
yes.
That was when it was at the height of its influence. He was the editor. Rolling Stone cover was the sign of making it as an artist. And so this was the person that was deciding in that position of power who deserved to be heard, who
Right.
deserved that spotlight. And so we can see how one person, it's a great example. I can see it, one person in a position of power, and that person's identity can then influence what the rest of us are going to see in the world. And so it makes me think about how many artists, didn't make it because this person had a white male influence and worldview and wielded that power, right? So I think
Mhm.
that um, Yeah, it's really, really fascinating. And I think that in terms of what happened to Mr. Winter, I think that, everything was totally appropriate. I actually thought that the apology that he made, I don't know if you saw it,
Mm,
seemed seemed like he must have a handle on the culture, right? So he must know immediately that he made a terrible mistake.
yeah.
That I thought that the apology was pretty good, and he lost his role on the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. I think that was
Yeah,
appropriate as well.
he
And so I
yeah, he
think
was
it's
removed
it's
from.
a really I thought it was just really a good example of cultural gatekeeping and something that we should all be pretty tuned into.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you for mentioning his apology, and then, of course, the removal of his status at the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame Foundation. I went into a rabbit hole about this, so thank you for sharing the story. So I do think it's important for us to recognize the contributions of Black and women musicians, and I found a quote that I want to share with folks. So Daphne Brooks, a professor of African American Studies at Yale, said Wenner's racially coded language undermined the brilliance of Black musicians, especially Black women. The music has always been steeped in intellectualism if we think of its form of historical, political, and social expression. This has been the case since the enslaved were scoring their own music as coded language in order to survive. That's carried forward to the blues and jazz and to rock and roll. And then she also added, for him to know that and not be able to recognize the complexities of Black intellectualism built into music is a problem. I,
Mm.
that just like I'm rereading it and I'm getting the chills because I feel like that really holds true. Um, and then, I was thinking about his apology and what you said, and the question is like, can he redeem himself or is it too late? And then it made me think of like, Rob, you and I should start a segment that's called Redeemable or Not. We just go through people who make like really stupid comments, and then we're like, is this redeemable?
Yeah, yeah, and I think the start of that the first hoop that you have to jump through in order to be considered to be redeemable is to understand
Yes.
what you said. And so I think that
Yeah.
that's where, at least in the statement, and who knows who wrote the statement? I would imagine he did because he's
Yeah.
he's a writer, and uh, at least it sounded like, okay, that was terrible, that was awful, and I fully accept it and take responsibility for it. So
Right. Right.
that's the first part of the segment. But I love the segment. I love this
Right?
idea. Yeah, yeah.
Redeemable or not? Maybe
Redeemable
that's
or not
season
redeemable?
5. We'll have to think about it.
I
Yeah.
know. I know. That could be a whole podcast, right?
I know. So what do you got for us this
All
week?
right. So next story, Nadia. Hold on. I have this. I have props for this. Hold on.
Oh,
You're gonna
props.
see. All right. There you go. All
Oh,
right.
sunglasses and hat. All
All
right.
right. So I would say, Nadia, that this is already one of my favorite episodes of Inclusive Collective because
Oh,
we
okay.
get to talk about both Black America and Rob Hadley's favorite college football team. And that's right, the
Ah,
Colorado Buffaloes. All
okay.
right. So and no, this is not a new hat, right? There's a lot of sweat stains on this hat.
Okay.
There's a lot of
Oh.
tears on this hat. So
Oh.
all right. So as you probably know, Coach Deion Primetime Sanders, first season as the
Yes.
head coach of the Colorado Buffaloes, he's led them to a national ranking. Celebrities like Snoop Dogg and The Rock and Wu-Tang Clan have come to Colorado games. LeBron James is live tweeting the games. Black households have tuned into these games, Colorado games, at a record rate, leading to some of the highest rated college football games ever on TV. All of this
Oh,
for a
wow.
school that is 5% Black in a city of Boulder, Colorado, that is only 1% Black. So,
Mm,
Nadia, before I
mm,
give my thoughts, and you could tell I
yeah.
have many,
Yeah.
what are you on board? Are you on board with my Colorado Buffaloes?
You know me in sports, and so I have questions for you. So because we not all our listeners are into sports like me.
Really?
I
Really?
don't think
Okay.
so.
All right.
So Colorado, is it University of Colorado or is this like Colorado State?
It's Colorado. Yes.
University of
I'm gonna
Colorado.
pretend. I'm gonna pretend you didn't ask that, but yes.
Okay.
Okay.
And then I think how wonderful to think of the lack of representation that's probably in those communities and then definitely at the school, like you just said. This is great, like, more opportunity. I love the hype around it. I will also just add that, like, in addition to your hat and to your sunglasses that you're wearing, I feel like I gotta get you the hoodie that apparently in
Oh,
the article I read,
yes.
it's there's a hoodie that says, "We coming." I'm getting that for you. Christmas time, baby.
That is yes. My both of my parents have, I believe, T-shirts that they sent me a picture of this week. So maybe we'll put that in the Instagram feed.
Sure.
right? So yeah, I definitely am on the same page in terms of representation. So there's a very complicated history of the
Mhm.
relationship between Black African American athletes and the University of Colorado. So that's my school. That's where I went to undergrad,
Okay.
and in particular in the football team. So
Mhm.
I had lunch with someone earlier this year who does DEI at the University of Colorado, and I was talking about the fact that I was worried because of some of the history of that program. That said,
Mhm.
there are no other big football programs like Colorado that's hired as many Black head coaches, right? So 4 of the last 5 head coaches there have been Black, including the last 3. So no other school has done anything like that.
Mm.
And you can see the adoption, as you said, because this is a prominent Black figure, a Hall of Fame player, broadcaster, and there is a severe lack of representation at that level, at that elite level in
Mhm.
college football. So he also doesn't run from who he is. He's very hip hop. He is
Mhm.
very religious, right? So in a very white town, in a very secular town,
Mhm.
there's this authentic piece of leadership here, and something to keep watch of is this is essentially a business story as well. So the football team was essentially broke and going out of it was essentially a business
Oh,
that was going out of business, right?
yeah,
They had
right.
had no success. They did something dramatic in terms of a turnaround, and he turned over the roster. He was at an HBCU
Okay.
previously, and so he came in. He told the kids there that were previously there that they didn't appreciate all that they had, and they didn't appreciate the privilege that they had, and that he was going to bring kids in that appreciated what with the opportunity.
Uh-huh.
He also said he didn't believe in culture, that he just wanted good players. But everything he has done since has been about culture, about accountability. He wants his kids to be good citizens in that community. So you're starting to
Wow.
also see like a grumbling from the old guard of college football, where people are saying, "Well, he's doing
Of
things too
course.
fast.
There's
He's
change.
he's
Yeah.
taking shortcuts." And every one of them, if they had the ability to do what he was doing, they would absolutely do it. So
Mm.
this is not just a sports story. This is a cultural story. This is a business story, and it's fascinating. And I'm just
So are folks
so
watching this
happy.
story in the college football world? Like, this is something that
This is
folks
probably
are
the biggest
watching?
story in all of sports, not just college.
Wow.
Yeah.
You heard it here first, folks.
And I'm sure you knew that, right? So yeah.
Yeah. Oh,
Yeah.
yeah. Well, thanks for sharing, Rob. That's great. Thank you for the excitement around it too. All right, folks. Well, that's it for the deets. We'll be right back with Professor and author Dr. Peter Huang.
Welcome back to Inclusive Collective. Our guest today is Dr. Peter Huang. Dr. Peter Henry Huang is an author utilizing his experiences as a mathematical economist, economics professor, and law professor to help address problems our society currently faces. His research includes analyzing how to boost people's decision-making skills by practicing mindfulness, helpful thinking styles, and cognitive diversity. Dr. Huang graduated at 17 from Princeton. He earned an applied mathematics PhD from Harvard. Dr. Huang is a JD with distinction from Stanford. He publishes about anti-discrimination, leadership, mindfulness, stakeholder capitalism, and social justice. Earlier this year, Dr. Huang released his new book, Disrupting Racism, Essays by an Asian American Prodigy Professor, available now wherever you buy books. Dr. Peter Huang, welcome to Inclusive Collective. So great to have you.
Thank you. Great to be here.
Thank you so much for joining us. I'm fascinated by practicing mindfulness and making the connection to decision making. Can you elaborate more on this and how this may play out in the workplace as it relates to leaders?
So, the first thing I guess to do is define mindfulness. So, John Kabat-Zinn defines mindfulness as sort of just a curious observation of the present moment of the world without judgment, which is a hard thing for lawyers to do. Um, so, it's sort of a non-judgmental, almost like stepping out and seeing what's happening and realize what's happening is like anything, not permanent, right? So, if you have thoughts of
Mhm.
anger, you can look at them and say, I'm not anger. That's an emotion which I may feel now. I may not feel that later, and just let it go. So one idea people use is like clouds in the sky. So the idea is that mindfulness is something that helps people make decisions, because a lot of decisions we make are sort of on autopilot. And that's not
Mm,
necessarily bad. It's just that, we have limited cognitive resources. So for certain things that aren't important, it's okay to not necessarily pay attention. But part of mindfulness is to know which decisions are important. And I've written in particular about ethics. So you may not even know there's an ethical issue because it doesn't come flashing to you saying this is legal ethics or this is an ethical, moral problem. For example, if you say securities fraud, you realize that's bad. But if you say cosmetic accounting, that doesn't sound as bad, right? So part of it
Hmm.
is to realize there's an ethical problem. And then the idea of mindfulness is to think about looking at it from different perspectives and saying, what are other people going to feel in the moment and later on? And can I think of doing something that's sustainable, that's ethical? Because presumably, if you do something unethical, you may get caught. I mean, prison is full of people who thought they would not get caught, right? So you have to think about how any action you take, any decision you make will make you feel, say, in 10 minutes, 10 months, and 10 years.
Hmm.
Suppose someone cuts me off
Mm,
on the freeway. I might want to speed up and cut them off. So I'll feel good in 10 minutes. But suppose I cause an accident, then
right.
I'll be very sad, especially if the accident kills someone, right? Then it's going to be lasting, I mean, for 10 years. So that's sort of one of the ideas of mindfulness is to sort of think about more alternatives, think about options, think about how what you do affects you, affects other people. And there's evidence that people who make mindful decisions tend to make more ethical ones. There's also evidence that people who
Mm.
practice mindfulness tend to have less implicit bias.
Mm.
Oh, I was just going to ask that. Yeah. I was just thinking that in terms of mitigating bias, is mindfulness practice something that folks would recommend to help think through those implicit or unconscious biases?
Yeah, there's research showing that practicing mindfulness not only reduces implicit bias, but actually reduces racist actions, which is what the
Mm.
law and society cares about more. You can think whatever you want in your brain as long as you don't do something about it. But to actually commit a racist act, mindfulness helps you do that less. Mindfulness
Right.
helps you, I think, to be more empathetic. They did an experiment where people that practice mindfulness were sitting in a room waiting for something, like, say, a doctor, and someone came in on crutches, and no one else got out of their seats because they were Confederates of the experimenter. The people who practice
Mm.
mindfulness were more likely to get up and say, "Why don't you take my seat?" Not all of them,
Uh,
but there was a higher number than people who,
Majority.
yeah. And so I think that's one idea is to think about how other people feel, and then you might do things that are different than if you sort of have a knee jerk reaction that's on autopilot, that's not having thought before. So I'll give you another way to remember this. One of my nephews, when he was, I think, 6 or 7, he was acting up. And my partner said, "You know what? You need a timeout." He goes, "No, no, no. I learned about this in school. I need to go hesitate." And what he had learned in school is he needs to go
Oh,
meditate,
hesitate.
but he confused that
Oh,
with hesitate.
meditate.
But he trapped the idea of meditation is go, stop,
Yeah.
hesitate. So
Oh, that's so wonderful. Thank you for sharing that.
I want to talk about the book a little bit. It's a great read. And so it's 2023. Yeah, I think you've retired from academic life, and your way to unwind was to release this book that's part personal story, part deep dive into the problems of racism, applying economic, legal, mathematical concepts, and you do it all with a lot of humor. So, where does this ambitious project come from? I guess the thing I was thinking is you could have picked an easier book to write. You tackle a lot in this book. And so, where does this come from, and why did you want to pursue it?
so yeah, that's a great question. It actually happened when my partner said to me after George Floyd was murdered and there were a lot of protests across the country. She goes, "Why don't you write something about that, about racism?" I said, "Oh, people have studied racism already in law with hate crimes. People have studied racism already in economics when they talk about, well, there's different models of racism. One is people have just preferences. They don't like to be with certain types of people, like orange people don't like purple people or something. And firms are not racist, but they might cater to their customers' racist preferences, right?
Hmm.
So another view is that racism is really due to lack of information or asymmetric information or private information. So employers can't tell how productive you are, but they can tell from a sample of people how productive people are on average. So if they hire a lot of white people, they might say, "Oh, these people are productive." If they never hire a green person, then they can have any kinds of beliefs about green people because they have no discovering evidence. So, for example, when certain black athletes broke into, I think, football or baseball, that was like a big deal, right? Because they were the first one. And if you have beliefs that are racist or sexist, you might behave in such a way as a firm or an employer to cause occupational segregation so that some people, women and minorities, never get to do certain things. like be on corporate boards or, or if they're there, they're the token one. There's only one of them. So I thought, okay, let me explore this more. And I wrote several articles because it was actually much more complicated than I thought. But I was trying to think of racism as like a problem, like a math problem. How would
Mhm.
you solve it? So what I really came to the conclusion that racism is basically mistaken beliefs. You form beliefs that are conditional on a person's race, the amount of melatonin in their skin, and you say, "Oh, I think Chinese people don't make great leaders. I think they're great followers." That's a belief, but it's mistaken. And the
Mhm.
question is, why don't you change your beliefs? Right? One is you don't get any evidence. You don't hire any Chinese people, so you don't know. Another is some Chinese people are productive and good leaders, but you say, "Oh, that's atypical." So you're stubborn. You want to hold on to your beliefs. I forget who said this, but a political scientist said people's beliefs are like their possessions. They don't want to give them up. And
Mhm.
another person said beliefs are like babies. If you attack my beliefs, you're attacking my child, right? So people might hold their beliefs
Mhm.
because their identity is associated with their beliefs. If everyone in their family, all their friends have this belief, they may find it hard to give it up. So one of the questions is, why don't people want information? And there's been some recent work about this, which is in decision theory or in economics and law, the idea is that more information helps you make a better decision. The problem with that is people often don't want to make a better decision if the information is emotionally upsetting. So, for example, there are people who will take a test for the BRCA1 gene for breast cancer or take a test for AIDS. They might even pay a copay, but they won't come back and find out the result because as long as they don't know, there's hope. They can believe that they don't have the
Oh.
disease.
Mhm.
So it's interesting how people don't always want information because there's an emotional valence to information. There's also an identity aspect to information. And the third aspect or um, dimension of information is how it helps you make better decisions. So of these three, people put different weights on them and at different times, right,
Mhm.
for different kinds of information. And that explains why certain information is hard for people to adopt, right? If everyone in your sort of circle believes in certain things, then you might have to believe in them. Otherwise, people will ostracize you.
Mm.
So, yeah, I mean, so it's an interesting way to think about racism as people are making a mistake in their beliefs and they may not want to change it. So the challenge is in how can we help them see um, the correct beliefs,
Right.
right? And some of the answers are already ones that people have tried, which is you want people to work together. You want people to be on a team. You want people to see that, you want the orange people to see that the purple people can help me win a game or build
Mhm.
something, right? Now, you want them not to compete because then they don't get the idea. They view them as sort of enemies or the other. You want them
Mhm.
to sort of work on things together so they say, oh, you're like me, or with you, I can do better. Another is to inject humor, right? Because humor is a way to sort of diffuse situations, like in science fiction or like something else, so that people see analogies and say, "Well, that person's silly." And then they realize, "Oh, that person's like me," right? So this is not such a bad thing. And another is to
Right.
create more positive cultures in organizations or society. Um, and the last one is to help people talk better. There's a woman at Harvard Business School who teaches a course on how to talk good. And the idea is just that
Yeah.
people
Right.
often don't
Like
know
linguistics
how to
or yeah.
talk. Yeah. And they don't listen, right? As lawyers, especially as you talk, I'm thinking of how to demolish your arguments instead
Mhm.
of actually listening
Mhm.
to you. So that's again part of the
Listening,
empathy,
right.
part of the mindfulness. And on we want to talk for connection sometimes, not just for information or to convey facts. We want to sort of connect with people, relationships. That's a lot of the reason people talk.
Dr. Huang, I'm just curious. I've kind of a two-part question here. Is the first is who do you hope that this book reaches? And I guess in terms of like audience, if you were to think about that. And then what are the considerations that you want folks to reflect on after reading your book?
Okay, that's a good pair of questions, which my editor asked me. So
Ooh,
I don't know.
maybe that's my new job.
You have a
Maybe I should
future,
look
Right,
into
right,
yeah,
right.
career.
as
Yeah.
a publisher, yeah.
Um, Actually, there were 3 chapters that my editor took out. One was on women leaders, especially during COVID. Another was on education, and the last one was on corporate greed. And
Mm.
I really think greed is actually the uh, motivating force of racism, free labor, viewing the people who you enslave as not really human or something.
Mhm.
So the corporate greed was related to the idea of climate change, or I like to say the word climate catastrophe. Um, but he thought those are each separate books. So I have my next 3
All
books
Oh,
right, there we
yeah.
go.
tonight.
Yeah.
Plus, I think the ideal audience for this book is someone who's curious about public policy and sees our society, American society, as being very right now polarized and divisive, and is interested in how to sort of return to a time when people were actually able to talk to each other despite their political differences or differences in beliefs. I'm not sure someone who's a uh, raging, seething racist, if there's such people, very hateful person. I'm not sure they will sit down and read this book. I think a lot of people who are not racist will read this book, but that's like preaching to the converted. I think part of the idea is the people who are not racist will say, okay, now I understand racism a little bit better. And I understand maybe some ways to diffuse or disrupt racism. It may not end racism, but it'll sort of interrupt it. Like one idea is to help people be more mindful, they might be less racist. Right. So that's, I think, the audience. It's the audience of people who are in agreement that racism is a bad thing. It should be disrupted, but are not sure how to do it.
Mhm.
Yeah, and I want to talk about that humor piece as well a little bit, right? So
Yeah.
one of the reasons that I can highly recommend this book unequivocally is that you have a chapter about humor, and then and how to use humor to mitigate nonviolent racism. And so you allude in the book to this 1984 Eddie Murphy sketch on Saturday Night Live, right? And so
That's
for me, right? So that particular clip, so a young white kid growing up in suburban Denver, you have no idea what's happening out in the real world, right? What's actually happening. You see that sketch and you're like, okay, racism, white supremacy, I get it, right? It's a real thing, it's powerful. And so, so talk about the importance of humor in helping people understand racism.
yeah. I forget who said. I think it's the person who did was it Super Size Me or something where he ate like McDonald's things every day, and he said
Oh,
Morgan
right.
Spurlock,
Yeah.
right? And he
Yes.
said if you can get people to laugh, you can get people to pay attention, right? So part of the idea is that there's an overflow of information or misinformation or disinformation these days.
Yep.
So we can't possibly pay attention to everything. So the things we pay attention to have to somehow be salient. And one way to be salient is to be funny, right? Whenever someone's funny, that you sort of put your guard down and you go, "Oh yeah, that is hilarious. This person's funny. Let me listen more to that." And you may learn something without really intending to, right? The other things that everyone, I think, understands what humor is, although there are differences, right? Across cultures and exactly what is funny. But I think it perhaps bonds people, right? It makes people see that the other person has a sense of humor, isn't too serious about themselves, and they changed it. But it used to be if you ask SIRI, what is 0 divided by 0? The answer would give you is, let's see, 0 divided by 0. Suppose you have 0 friends and you want to divide 0 cookies. That doesn't make sense. And by the way, how sad it is that you have 0 friends. How did this happen? It gets very serious, like a therapy session.
I love
They
that.
changed it.
Yeah.
Right. I think humor lets people let their guard down. People may be more receptive to information or to changing their beliefs.
Mhm.
Um, but it doesn't work if someone's gonna, hit you on the head with a bat. So it's not like
Mhm.
you should tell a joke to a white supremacist and they'll say, "Oh, you're a comedian." Okay. So
Yes.
Jenny Yang, um, when Andrew Yang suggested we should be more patriotic, that Asians should show Americans that they're really true Americans, she went into Pasadena, waved the American flag, and had ranch dressing, and said to people, "I really love this country. Here's my transcript. I got all A's. I can help you." And um, basically, just show how silly sometimes that is. Um, that, the people you're talking to in a situation you're talking to is one, maybe there's violence. Humor is not going to solve that problem.
Right.
But if it's a
Yep.
nonviolent kind of racism, then I think humor has a chance of um, getting people to stop and listen. Because I think the idea is that racism is kind of mindless. It's not really thinking of the person as an individual. It's saying, I'm just using your skin color to judge you. That's all I need to know about you. That's clearly false. And that's clearly not a good way to judge people. I forget who said this. Another comedian, he goes, there are good people of any race or ethnicity. There are also bad people, right? For every Mother Teresa, there's, someone who's bad. For every Gandhi, there's a Hitler, right? So every race and ethnicity has good and bad people, has a distribution of people, qualities. And in some sense, if you think of people as high dimensional points in a space of characteristics that change, their race or ethnicity doesn't tell you much about them at all, right? Because they're good and bad people of that race or ethnicity. So what you need to do is learn more about the person as an individual, right? You want to pay more attention to them. You don't want to sort of just judge them by the color of their skin, which is basically stereotyping, right? You don't want to do that because that's not a helpful decision heuristic. It's actually easy to do, but it's wrong.
Right.
It's not correct.
Right.
Yeah.
I really appreciate that, bringing humor to certain conversations. I think especially if there's already trust established, and so I really appreciate that. So Dr. Huang, we ask all our guests this: is there a resource that you would want to recommend to our listeners that's related to diversity, equity, and inclusion? And of course, disrupting racism essays by an Asian American prodigy professor is one of
Right.
them. Is there an additional one that you'd love to share with folks?
Uh, Oh, by the way, I'm not responsible for the subtitle because my partner said, "What is a prodigy professor?" I said, "I don't
Yeah,
know."
tell
And
actually, why don't
I
you
wanted
share
to
that
say,
really quickly? I'm
I asked
curious.
prodigy, and then someone said, "No, once you're a prodigy, you're always a prodigy." Like Mozart was always a prodigy. I
Yeah.
said, I don't know about that." I said, "I was a child prodigy, maybe still a child, no longer a prodigy."
Well, just in line with the book, right? So you really start with your own experiences,
Right.
talking about starting at Princeton at 13 or 14, but living on campus by yourself. There's some really heartbreaking stories in there about going through that experience. Right? You're living on campus, you're by yourself, away from your family at that age, and so even you share in the book that a lot of the stuff that is there you had never really shared or talked about before, and so yeah, talk a little bit about what that experience was like.
So I went at 14, and my parents, I think it was actually my tiger mom, did not want me to. She wrote a letter to the dean of students saying, "My son Peter is very innocent. I don't want him to be exposed to sex, rock and roll, or drugs." I don't know if it's in that order. So instead of being in a suite with 5 or 6 other people, I had a single room. I don't know what other people thought. Like, is he a leper? Or, what did they think of me? And in my room, I had Winnie the Pooh sheets. The other pair of sheets was Charlie Brown sheets on my bed. And then I had a little bookcase with every single required and recommended text for the courses I was taking. And I had to keep a diary of the money and how I spent it. I mean, there are people who go to college at 17 or 18 who look like they're 14. So I didn't go around telling people, "I'm 14. How are you?" But
Right.
still, it was very lonely. I remember crying when my parents got me off. And you're not going to ask a girl who's 18 on a date and say, "Hi, let's go out. Can you drive? Because I don't know how to ride a bicycle or drive."
Mm.
So,
Mhm.
um,
Yeah.
I wouldn't recommend it. My mother, I think, meant well. There's a story. I was at Horace Mann, which is a prep school in Riverdale, and at that time it was not co-ed. But I had a crush on my 8th grade math teacher, and I was writing her poems in German. For Valentine's, they gave her the equation and polar coordinates for her heart. My mother found this out, and she thought, "My goodness, he's being distracted. He's not studying." So between 8th and 9th grade, she took me to NYU, and I audited Calc 1 and pre-calc at the same time. And the professor wrote to him a concern letter saying he would have gotten an A. Then I was allowed to take Calc 2 for credit. So when I went back to 9th grade, there's no math I can take. So she succeeded in her goal of getting me to not be able to be with the person I had a crush on. But um,
Wow.
My two brothers have daughters, and they're at the age where they might go to college, 14. And my mother is I think a tiger grandma. She's now sort of suggesting that. I don't have any children. I'm sure if I had children, she would be doing that. And my partner says, well, if she pushes that, I would certainly have a talk with her. I said, I will buy tickets to see that.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right. My
Well,
partner once said to me, she goes, your mother would like me more if instead of being a Dominican Republic OBGYN who went to Harvard, I was a Chinese neurosurgeon or cardiac surgeon who played the piano and the violin and spoke Mandarin perfectly. I said, yes, that's true, but I don't know why you want to date my mother.
Oh,
Right, so,
incredible.
yeah.
well, Dr. Peter Huang, we agree with your publisher. You're still a prodigy to us, and we really appreciate you joining us today on Inclusive Collective. Come back and see us when you write the follow-up.
Well,
I want to read the one on greed and capitalism. So
Yeah,
that's the one
free
I'm looking for.
markets.
Thanks so
Yeah, it was
much.
such a pleasure
thank you.
having you on.
It was fun to be here.
Stay with us, folks. We'll be right back with our calm reflections and raves and rants. Welcome back, folks. So we just finished chatting with Dr. Peter Huang, author of Disrupting Racism, Essays by an Asian American Prodigy Professor, Rob. He was so funny. He's a delight, huh?
He's even more
Um,
funny, yeah, off
Yeah.
camera, right? Yeah.
Off podcast, yeah, off recording. Do you have any reflections on the conversation that we had?
My first one, Nadia, was I'm looking at myself and I have like 8 books in the background here. And
Yeah.
so I need a lot more books because Dr. Huang has about 4,000 behind him. So I don't know if
Right.
that's a result of being a prodigy or if that's how you get to become a prodigy. But either way, I'm way behind Dr. Huang. So
Yeah,
I think that
sure.
I was really glad you jumped in and did mindfulness right away because I think
Mm.
when I'm working with clients and we're talking about implicit bias and we talk about interrupting bias in processes, what we always say, in pretty much every application, the way that uh, that you disrupt bias is by taking a step back and slowing things down and starting to think about it. And so I thought that was a really nice way to start the conversation and a good reminder for me that some of the things that we're doing are actually rooted in mindfulness.
Agree. I mean, that's my takeaway is like I really appreciated that um connection. So as you know, I'm certified in MBSR,
Mm.
mindfulness based stress reduction, and really just my whole goal when getting certified in that was really to connect how to slow down your mind, body, and soul so that you can mitigate bias because bias comes up, um, really high stress times, most times, and in your decision making and interactions. So yeah, love that. Also really appreciate his story. Just from being a prodigy. So folks, definitely go get the book, read it, and we thank Dr. Huang in joining us.
Yeah, there's so many great pop culture, movie, book, song references in
Uh-huh.
that book.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's really fun, quick read. So definitely recommend it. So Nadia, it is time to rant and rave. Are you ready?
I am.
You're gonna go ahead and rant for us?
I'm ranting this week. Rob, we're back to your favorite topic, sports.
Yes, yes.
So it's fall. We mentioned earlier. That means it's pumpkin spice latte. Bringing it back full circle here. And football time. So what did the NFL do this time? So I don't know all of these like people, these players, football fans. Likely, just I'm gonna go slow because I think this particular instance is better than daytime drama. I think Jim Trotter, who previously worked for NFL media, filed a discrimination and retaliation lawsuit against the NFL and in his former company. He claims that he repeatedly called out the league for not addressing longstanding institutional discrimination within the coaching ranks, the NFL league office, and the NFL media newsroom. And then later, he claims that it affected his own employment. So there's a whole story there. I'm not going to go down it like a deets here, but The name like Roger Goodell came up, and I know I'm in New England, so a lot of people don't like him. Where I'm seated, and then Jerry Jones's name came up, and Terry Pagula, and just all of these different types of conversations of people making comments around discrimination. And so, it's just these allegations are really just another reason why I dislike the NFL.
Okay. Yeah, no,
Moving forward.
there's a lot. Your rant is the NFL is bad. Yeah. Tough to
I
argue
stopped
against it.
I stopped watching it after how they treated Colin Kaepernick, and even prior to that with all some of the abuse that was happening. And I think that there could be a better leadership. But that's being said, that's
I
a
think
whole
that
other.
is a very fair point. There could be better leadership there. So let's talk about good leadership, right? So let's rave about our friends in Boston down at City Hall. And so Bostonians will no longer have to identify their gender when applying for a marriage license. That's the headline. But I think the cool thing here is that the city launched a gender-aware guidelines and standards campaign, or some, I guess they're guidelines and standards, right, to improve inclusion in communication with residents. So Mayor Michelle Wu, whose sister used to babysit my son, actually, Nadia,
What?
right? So talk about that
I
degree
did
of
not
separation.
know that.
Yeah,
Oh, wow.
she said that this is a big step in building a more inclusive city. So well done, Mayor Wu. She's such a star, isn't she, Nadia?
She
You
is.
like Mayor
Love
Wu?
her.
Star.
Love
Absolute
Mayor
star.
Wu.
So
Let's try to get her on the pod.
Yeah. I think going through the old babysitter, that's one way to get it done, right?
That is. Yep.
All right, Nadia, thanks so much. That's it for Inclusive Collective. Just a reminder that if you're looking for DEI and workplace culture strategy consulting, problem solving, or training, you can reach out to Nadia at nasconsultants.com and Rob at Takanoconsulting.com. Inclusive Collective is a production of Rifelion Media and edited by Ari Mathey. We would love to hear from you. Send us your feedback at inclusivecollective@rifelion.com. Please check us out on LinkedIn, YouTube, Instagram, Facebook, and TikTok. And be sure to make sure that you're following up on LinkedIn, because you can also subscribe to our IC monthly newsletter. If you like what you heard, be sure to subscribe and rate. And you can check us out wherever you get your podcast. Thanks again to our guest, Dr. Peter Huang. We'll be back next week. Bye, Nadia.
Be well.
Yo.